Hey guys, Chris from ProvoBeast Audio Installation, and in today's video we're doing an amp and sub install in this 2019 BMW X6. Now in this install we're going to show you how to integrate that amp and sub to the existing factory audio sound system. Let's get started. Now as we jump into things here, a couple of things to note are trim level on our X6 actually does include the Harman Kardon factory audio sound system, which means it does have a factory amplifier of a sort and a factory sub. We'll probably be integrating this amp and sub using the signal to the OEM subwoofers to provide signal to that new amplifier. If you don't have the Harman Kardon audio system, generally BMW still has a factory amplifier and the location that we're going to be working at. Regardless, we can add notes based on your trim level down in the description of the video for you. Without further ado, let's head to the bench to show you the parts that we're going to need for our install. Alright, so here at the bench, the parts that we're using for our install here today, first and foremost is the amp and sub that we're going with. Customer wants us to put in this kicker shallow mount 12-inch sub, does about 400 watts RMS. This is the CVT DF12 enclosure. It's like I said, 12-inch downfiring subwoofer wired to a final impedance of 2 ohms. This is a great sub option because you can load things on top of it. You can disconnect it if needed, and it minimizes the risk of any damage to the cone. To power this sub, we do need an amplifier, so we're going to do this micro amp, which is a really great budget-friendly amp for its size. It does 500 watts at 1 ohm, or about 300-400 watts at 2 ohms, so we're going to be running it at 2 ohms today. Power that amplifier, we do need a wiring kit, which we're doing the Scar Audio 8-gauge OFC amplifier wiring kit. Comes with everything you need for the install. And finally, to integrate it to the factory audio sound system, we need some sort of line-out converter, and we do recommend, especially for these European-based vehicles, going with the Audio Control LC2i line. This is the Pro version, and it also includes a bass knob. This not only will provide us the signal conversion from the factory amp to our new amplifier inputs, but it's also going to generate a remote turn on, so it'll turn on the system as soon as the factory audio sound system does. With that all being said, what we're going to do is start mapping out the location to run our wiring, mount our amplifier and LC2i Pro, and start planning the install itself. So let's head over to the trunk to start getting everything disassembled. So at the car, fortunately for us today, our batteries, where to pull power from for our new amplifier, is not up underneath the hood. Instead, is actually underneath this black cover here. So let's go ahead and get this cover pulled off so you have access to those batteries. Alright, so with the cover off, you can indeed see our 2 battery setup here. This control module dictates power usage between the both, just so it ensures that the vehicle has the right current for the start, stop, and other 12-volt requirements on the vehicle. This is your primary battery, the bigger one here on our left, and on the passenger side is the auxiliary battery here. Generally speaking, you can go to both, but it's best to go to the larger battery, as this primarily controls the most of the function of the vehicle. If you want to disconnect grounds to really shut down the vehicle, you have to disconnect both grounds on the battery. Now there's a pocket here we're going to show you on the left hand side where we're going to use that space to build a mount or a panel for our amplifiers. Now as we dig in a little closer, there is our factory amplifier. We can use this location to tap into the speaker wire signal that goes to our factory subs that are mounted underneath each of the front seats of our BMW. We can also build a little panel to accommodate and house our new amplifier and LC2i also in this same location. Alright, so we're back here at the bench with our pocket now open. We wanted to find a really convenient and easy way for us to mount our amps. We use these ABS out mounts all the time. This is just 1/8 inch ABS plastic that we can cut with more like tin snips. And essentially here, we cut this shape. It's going to snag the 2 bolts at the bottom of the Harman Kardon factory amplifier. And we're going to make a bolt here, and we can also mount it along this side. Now, the way that we're going to power and run everything, Power and ground, there's a factory ground right below the amplifier here, and power is really close too since the batteries are in the trunk. LC2I needs a constant 12 volt in ground, which we can snag either off the terminals of our amplifier, or you can run right to a constant 12 volt source like the battery. And it has a remote in and a remote out. So the remote in would be if we have a remote turn on wire or an accessory wire already available in the vehicle to turn everything on. Most instances, if you're using an LC2I, you want to use that built-in feature, which is just solely the remote out, which is essentially going to create a remote turn-on trigger for all your accessories. So that's going to be a remote out to our amplifier here. We got a feed speaker level inputs, whether it's a speaker or in our case a factory subwoofer signal. We're going to send right in here. Output for our amplifier, there's going to be 2. Even though it's a 2-channel, this is really cool because it actually provides 4 channels of output. This is a bass output, which is controlled by AccuBass and the line level adjustment there. So for our amplifier, this bass output, our amplifier actually has these RCA outputs through this harness, and it's actually short enough where we can get some male to male RCA couplers and actually plug them right on in. So we have one here just to kind of test the size and see how it fits. So we actually don't need to run additional RCAs because these are close enough together where we can plug them right on in. So at this point of time, we're going to wire up as much here on our little amp board that we've created as possible before we get it into the car to start running our wiring there. Alright, so we've been working up wiring our amp rack here. Like I said before, it's a lot easier to do it here instead of in the car because you can really make your connections nice and get everything wired up the way you want it versus working in a tight space. Got our amplifier and LC2I Pro mounted here. Like I said, these are nice and short. We'll just put our last coupler in here, and we started making the other connections on this side of the amplifier. Now, like mentioned before, our amp needs certain inputs. It needs a 12 volt battery input and a ground, and we actually have those going down, so we'll go to a factory ground, and we'll run our power wire all the way to the battery here, and we'll put the inline fuse as close to the battery as possible. Put our little Provo Beast heat shrink on there, and we always use wire ferrules to make it a nice secure connection. There's also a output for the subwoofer here. So this is going to be the output from the amplifier to the sub. We also loom that comes down, and again goes all the way, runs all the way down to our subwoofer that we'll install in the trunk. Now our remote in to trigger the amp to turn on goes to, remember, up here to the LC2I. Now the LC2I has the output for the remote out, which we did there. Again, we're not doing a remote in because we're going to have this guy create one for us. But that blue remote out goes to the remote in of the amplifier. LC2I also needs power and ground, so a red and the black from the 12 volt and ground respectively. Also we loomed and we just snagged it from the terminals here on the amplifier. We have a bass knob wire, which will go up front. Both units have a bass knob. We're going to do the LC2I to control the line level here. Now our LC2I needs to know what to play in order to have that line level output for the amplifier. So we need to feed it some speaker inputs. Now there's 2 channels of input here, and we ran that up along here. And this will tap into the subwoofer outputs of our factory amp, and they're right there at the base of the amplifier. So we have 2 leads here. We're going to just use some T-tabs you can solder in, but we're going to make those connections that way. Take this amplifier, get it in the car, work on our fuse holder, and start running our wire to the appropriate locations. Alright, so we went ahead and got our amplifier all mounted here. It's looking awesome. I mean, super nice and clean up against that back wall using the factory 2 bolt locations there. We also added an extra self-tapper there and mounted it down at that little tap below, just so it's nice and snug. It's nice and sturdy and easily accessible if we need to get to it. Plenty of ventilation there. Nice big cavity. So we ran our cables down along this channel here up underneath. We got our battery cable as well as our sub output. Sub output goes right there. We have our bass knob, just a mess there. We need to run that forward towards the front. And then our battery cable comes up here. We actually did a service loop, comes up here into our fuse holder. then a nice shorty that goes to the positive post here on our primary battery. As for the ground, you could make a really long ground and come all the way down and go to the ground stud here. That's an option. We went to the factory grounding point right there. So it's a nice and short ground, which is perfect. We ran our speaker signal input. It's just right here for now. But if we pull this on back, this main loom, which is our next segment here, is where we're going to tap into the subwoofer output wires feeding the two subs underneath the front seat signal. We're going to snag some of that signal for our LC2I, and that's in turn going to provide signal to our amplifier so it knows what to play. All right, so next here we need to tap into the factory harness to snag signal for our LC2I. Actually, there's a little bit of tested tape holding this together, kind of like down here. We removed it so we have a little bit of space to work, and then we'll re-loom this harness. We've done some test tuning. Red's going to be positive, brown is going to be your negative. And essentially here, you can either solder into those or use T-taps, totally up to you. You want a good solid connection. So we're going to hook our positive and negative to those two sets of wires. You can use T-taps, and that's essentially going to rob the signal. We don't want to break that connection. Alright, so we went ahead and T-tapped. We just did both channels on that blue, red, and blue, brown wire. It's a sub output. So it's pulling that sub output right into our LC2I Pro. Just using some T-taps there. At this point, we've got everything zip tied, cleaned up here, and we can now put this panel back into place. Alrighty, so we got everything buttoned up there. Everything's all put back together here. We just need to pick up some RCA couplers. The really short ones, and those will ship in tomorrow. But for now, we got a little shorty RCA in there to take care of us for now. Everything's looking super nice and clean here. If we go ahead and open this up, there's our kicker box. Fits there perfectly. And you can still put stuff on top. You can also put it up here as well if needed. We just set our gains with an SMD DD1. Got everything set here on our LC2I Pro, and ran the bass knob up front. It actually sounds awesome, and the nice thing is it's 100% all hidden. That's about it for this install. Everything went nice and smoothly here. If you like any of the parts that we used, we can link them down in the description of the video, and also make any other suggestions for parts for your install at home. Be sure to hit the like button if you liked what you saw, and don't forget to subscribe. We post great content on the channel all the time, and we will see you in the next video.